Hello and welcome once again to Iowa News and Views. I'm Derek Maurer, your host for this edition. Thanks for joining us. A few months back, as millennial fever was reaching its highest pitch, I read something that someone put out. I think I saw it on email, and they were talking about the two things that everyone could do, every American could do to reduce their impact on the environment the most. And these two things were drive less and eat less meat. Today we're going to talk about eating less meat. And our guest is Mark Smith, a vegetarian. Mark, thank you for coming and agreeing to put yourself through this torture chamber of Iowa News and Views, this grilling that you're going to get.
Okay.
No, really, it's a very friendly show.
All right.
You know that. Mark, I first met Mark some years ago, and when we both served on the board of Environmental Advocates, an organization in the Iowa City area, and he was one of the first people who really exposed me to vegetarianism, and I can't say that I've really taken the pledge quite yet, but I don't eat much meat. And I think that's partially due to Mark's influence in some way. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you got into this. Mark, you grew up on a farm.
Yep, hog and cattle corn farm. In Harrison County, Woodbine, Iowa.
And you had a grand champion.
I was a 4-H member and raised hogs and cattle all through late grade school, high school.
Okay, so you didn't move in here from California.
That's true.
All right. And you're a former Peace Corps volunteer.
Served in beef eating Botswana, yes.
In Southern Africa.
Southern Africa.
And you're a former school teacher, elementary school.
Right.
And now you're a massage therapist.
That's right.
So that's all about you.
That's right.
When did you give up eating meat?
About 12 years ago, I read a book by John Robbins called Diet for New America. That's a tape that he produced a few years later. I found it an absolutely persuasive book and changed my eating habits from that time on.
Well, what was it about his message that persuaded you?
Well, his message is somewhat three-part. That one, he just documented in ways that I found really persuasive and amazing about the health implications of eating meat, that all sorts of the diseases that we tend to get in later years seem to be correlated closely with the amount of meat that we eat. Certainly heart disease, cancers, osteoporosis, diabetes, lots of high blood pressure, stroke. All of these things the evidence seems clear that the less meat you eat, the less fat you consume, the less likely you are to suffer from those problems. To some extent, the less protein. We tend to eat too much protein in our amazing diet. We don't eat like people have ever eaten before in this country. We eat a lot more protein, a lot more fat, and of course a lot more sugar.
That's one of the things you hear about vegetarianism is that, you just can't get enough protein if you don't eat meat.
Right. I think unless you're anorexic or just eating sugar, it's hard to eat vegetables, rice, beans. It's hard to eat it's hard to design a vegetarian diet where you would get too little protein, I think. That's simply not a problem in our culture. So the health arguments, which of course can be discussed for a long time and in great detail, not necessarily by me, but a lot is being written and studied about that. That's one segment of my reason and lots of people's reasons for becoming a vegetarian. A second commanding reason is the effect that animal production has on the environment here and around the world. Especially when you look out, say, in California or the High Plains states and in California, where water is such a precious commodity and an expensive commodity, and the lion's share of it is being used both taken out of the Oglala aquifer as well as being taken out of the various rivers like the Colorado. And the lion's share of that water is being used for beef production, for animal product consumption, to irrigate the alfalfa and the food, as well as actually just directly servicing the animals. That's just one aspect of the environmental impact. Of course, in Iowa, so many people suffer from the hog confinement buildings that are next door to them. Our waters, our streams are fouled by animal manures. Not so much in Iowa, where we actually can use a lot of manure for fertilizer, but in so many places where large animal production is underway, they really can't use the manure. So there's mountains of manure that's just an environmental hazard that they don't know how to dispose of in a useful way.
Well, I want to get back a little bit to the what it takes to grow the food that we run through animals to produce meat. I remember years ago seeing a commercial, and I may not remember this correctly, and the statistics may have changed, but at that time, as I recall, beef producers were bragging that it took something like 20 or 30 pounds of grain to make a single pound of meat.
And I don't know exactly what those. Actually, I think it might be closer to 12.
Oh,
and you might be right. But at any rate, it's a lot. Yeah, we wouldn't have to be encouraging farmers to plant fence row to fence row if we were directly consuming their goods instead of having it processed through. You know, there'd be a lot of opportunity for grassways and trees, which could have a real impact even on global warming, I think, if we could reduce that input, that need to have so much grain for animals.
yeah. Well, so you were personally moved to give up eating meat. I assume, did it happen overnight? Was it something
Darn
that took
close.
a while to think about, or?
In my particular case, it did pretty much happen overnight. I found, you know, it's not that I have a huge moral. It doesn't upset me to see somebody else eating meat or something like that. It's not a moral question in that sense, and it wouldn't be a moral thing if I ate meat occasionally. For me, it's much easier to not have to be making that decision all the time, but just to have it, you know, just to have it a simple fact of my life that I don't eat meat, and so I don't ever have to decide.
Well, how did your vegetarian diet develop? Because if you just stop eating meat suddenly, that's a big part of your diet,
Right.
and you have to fill that in somehow. How did that start to develop?
Well, I read, I started paying attention to some, you know, I went to the library and got some books on, some food books about how to make a vegetarian food. And there's lots of those there. There's wonderful cookbooks. I brought some today.
Okay. Which one would you like to hold
Well, this
up?
book right here is a
Okay.
fairly new book. It's fairly expensive. It's a wonderful book. I'm not proud of the fact that my wife does most of the cooking in our house, and she loves this book. It's just really full of information and wonderful recipes.
Well,
But-
it's called Vegetarian Cooking for Everyone.
Right. And there's lots of them. That's a fairly new one. There's good ones that have been around for a long time. The Moosewood Cookbook, Laurel's Kitchen.
Yeah, Moosewood's pretty famous.
And of course you can, I mean, there's whole shelves. I was just up at the library today, and there's shelves of wonderful cookbooks.
Mhm.
So, you know, you do have to kind of look for new ideas about what to eat when the simple thing that you've always relied on is pushed aside. And you know, I think if you're a person who doesn't cook, who doesn't want to allot any time, or have a wife who wants to, or a husband who wants to allot any time for cooking, it is a bit harder. because I think it takes a little bit more creativity, perhaps, and a little bit more time to do good vegetarian cooking. Although we're blessed by having the co-op downtown with a great deli and wonderful vegetables and products to use.
Yeah, I'd venture to say that in most of the communities where Iowa News and Views is seen, there's some source for natural foods.
Right.
Yeah.
As many people my age did, this recipe's for a small planet here.
We'll hold that up too.
Which we read that. I think that's a '60s book, and
Yeah.
we kind of became whole food eaters a long time ago. So we had become used to whole grains and using fresh vegetables and so forth in our cooking, which again made it easier to make the transition away from meat.
Yeah. Well, now you mentioned that actually everyone in your family is mostly vegetarian, if not vegetarian. Did that happen at the same time that you stopped eating meat?
Well, my daughters.
I'm just wondering how,
Yeah.
there's got to be a dynamic of people
Right.
sharing meals and having different diets.
Well, for a while, for a few days, maybe a few weeks, we were kind of cooking 2 sets of meals every meal. I started cooking my vegetarian stuff, and my wife and daughters were eating more regular, and then we started sharing, and finally Beth just said that was crazy to be cooking twice, and so she pretty much made that shift. And really one of the wonderful things about a vegetarian diet is that not only are you really helping the environment, I believe, a great deal, you're also helping your health a great deal. But really, I feel like that I eat wonderful food every day. I don't ever feel like I'm sacrificing. Vegetarian eating is the best food in the world. I feel like. Sometimes if I'm driving across the country and I have to stop at a diner, then pickings can get a little slim. But really, in any good restaurant, now there's wonderful things to choose from, even in a restaurant.
Okay. I'm going to take just a second to remind our viewers that you're watching Iowa News and Views. We love to hear from you. We have an email address. It's inews@pobox.com. We have a web page. You can visit our website and find out what's been going on behind the scenes with iNews. You can see pictures of the crew and the cast and learn just everything about iNews that you ever wanted to know, and you can send us messages that way too. So we like your ideas. When you got an idea or idea for a show or a guest, please let us know. I'm talking in this edition with Mark Smith. He's a vegetarian, and we're talking about going vegetarian in Iowa. Mark, we talked a little bit about the family dynamic of having different diets, and you're someone who's, as I know, talks to the people around you too, the people you come in contact with. You're active in your church and all that. How have other people reacted when you've talked about vegetarianism? It's a pretty controversial subject. I think that this Diet for a New America, wasn't that a show that Iowa Public Broadcasting would not
That's right.
broadcast?
That's right. Even though it was very well received in much of the country, it was not allowed to be shown in Iowa.
I've seen it. It's an excellent program, and I'm sorry that Iowans never got a chance to see it on Iowa Public Television.
Right.
But so how do people react?
Well, I've in the last few years, I haven't been quite as zealous in trying to share this information with other people as I was in the earlier years when I was hit with the enthusiasm. I think people have stopped seeing vegetarianism as a really strange thing. It's a bit more mainstream than that for most people now. My brothers, particular one brother who is a farmer who raises and sells cattle and hogs in pretty large numbers, he certainly doesn't like to discuss this topic with me. And it is vegetarianism provides some challenge, I think, to the economy of Iowa, were it to become the dominant way that people eat. It would mean some real shifts for the agriculture business in Iowa. I think it could be a positive thing, but it would be hard to convince a lot of farmers of that. I think once people start eating good vegetarian food and see that it's not a self-sacrificing thing, then that changes people's attitudes quite a bit. I think one of the reasons that many people are vegetarians is because of loving the animals and not wanting to kill animals. And I think that really is a persuasive argument for many people. That doesn't happen to be what motivates me, although I think a lot more people would become vegetarians if they took tours of slaughterhouses.
If they saw how meat was produced.
Right. If they saw the whole production process, in many cases, the way chickens are treated, I think, is pretty hard to stomach. Actually, when I visit my brother's hog production, I'm not quite clear on if that's cruel or not. They have air conditioning and everything. Maybe it's not so bad how those pigs live their lives, although it's certainly not a natural way to live a pig's life. I think that particular argument is an emotional argument that people can react quite strongly to. But it seems to me that your health, if you look at the evidence and see that you're much more likely to get heart disease or cancer or diabetes if you're eating a lot of meat, then you certainly might decide, just as people decide to keep smoking, you certainly might decide that it's worth it to you to continue that way, but it doesn't seem like it's something that would offend a person to gain that information, to gain that power over their lives. Fat and obesity is another big issue. I think people eating whole foods, you have to eat a lot to really put on a lot of extra pounds. We can certainly get a few extra, but I think that's another big health issue that is well addressed by a good whole food diet.
Now, I forgot to ask, are you vegan? Are you vegetarian?
Yeah, vegetarians come in all different
Let's explain that
sizes.
a little bit.
Right. Some people don't eat meat of any kind, or milk, or any milk products like cheese or eggs, or, in other words, any animal products.
And that's called vegan.
And those are vegans or
vegan,
vegans.
yeah.
I don't think they have ever quite decided on how to pronounce the word. Myself, I don't not eat cheese and milk. I don't drink milk anymore, and I don't go searching for cheese. But if it's there, it's there for me. And the same with eggs. Although I don't have a plate full of eggs, but if it's in something, I don't mind.
Well, let me just take a little break and hold up this other cookbook, How It All Began. Get it? Vegan.
I think, I think the arguments that a vegan diet is a little more strange. I think it takes quite a bit more effort to make it real tasty, but I'm sure it can be done. I think it's probably quite a bit harder. I think it's also probably healthier. I think the less animal products you eat, the better off you are if you replace those with good whole foods. So I certainly respect that diet. It's just more vigorous than I care to be.
Yeah. Well, Tell us a little bit about your efforts when you were an elementary school teacher in the Iowa City District. You tried to get the schools to offer a vegetarian alternative for lunch. What happened?
Right. Well, we did. Actually, the dietitian was responsive to that in the sense that she came out and I was teaching at Penn School in North Liberty, and they did offer a vegetarian entree. I forget now if it was every day or I think it was maybe just, I think perhaps it was every day. The problem was, or a problem was, that it wasn't a really kid-friendly entree, and so it didn't look good to the kids, and it didn't go over very big at all. It wasn't chosen. And I think it would take, I think it would take some effort to make that choice really attractive to kids. Any marketing person would tell you that, and when you're trying to get kids to make that kind of a change, it's a bit of a challenge. So it wasn't a real successful effort. I sure think it's something that needs to be done, that the food that we feed kids in school is very heavy. I feel it's very heavy in fats, and it's too bad. We need to be educating kids about how to eat well and doing that, I think.
I think schools probably go by nutritional standards that are established at the state, maybe even some of them at the federal level.
To some extent,
certainly
right.
at the state level. What do you know about that?
Yeah. Well, teaching food issues like nutrition in schools is very interesting. For all the time that I was in school, and really up until just about now, and I'm sure still in most schools, all of the displays, the information, the materials that teachers are given to teach about nutrition to children, all of it comes from mainly the Dairy Council and the Egg Council. It's really advertising for milk and eggs, and the Beef Council also. They've done a fabulous job of producing very flashy materials, very teacher-friendly materials, and they've inundated it. If you went back and looked at all of the charts that you saw about what to eat as a kid in school, they would have all been brought to your school, delivered free by these different marketing councils. I think that's just scandalous. It's an outrage that we're letting these commodity groups tell our children to eat their products, flying right in the face. I mean, who needs more bacon? There's not a person in the world that needs. Well, there probably are. Perhaps there are some starving people. Not a person in America that needs more bacon, but yet that's the kind of nutrition education that we're giving our children.
So what begins really as a personal issue can become a political issue.
It is, food is very political. Certainly in Iowa, I mean, we're an agriculturally based state, and Iowa State University particularly has been under great pressure from the Beef Council and the Pork Council. They don't vary from the party line very much at all. As a teacher, I was sent to Iowa State one summer for a course on teaching agriculture issues, and the whole course was again what the Beef Council was giving teachers, and we were to learn how to use these products, all the commodity groups, and opposing the use of those materials is very controversial. Certainly was at that conference.
And difficult to. We were talking before the show. You said you never felt more isolated than you did at that moment.
That's right. That was a very difficult experience. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if times have changed. You mentioned that you think vegetarianism is a bit more mainstream now. I don't know how much times have changed.
Well, I think in Iowa City, uh, I haven't taught for a couple of years now, but I think that the materials, you can probably find some variety in the materials. I'm sure a lot of teachers are still using the Dairy Council stuff, but I think you can find other information. And the federal guidelines now have changed. They've built a pyramid which de-emphasizes what they had been saying in terms of puts meat at a lower level. You know, I think a lot of educators, like say the Heart Council and whatever the Heart Association, I think quite a few of those kinds of organizations that are trying to get people to eat better feel like that telling them that the best way is to cut out meat out of your diet. That they feel like people won't hear that, and so they don't say it. They say, eat lean meats. My belief is that they know that that's not the best choice, but that they think it's the only choice that they can sell, and so that's what they do. You know, I think they ought to tell us the truth and let us make our own decisions. You know.
Or like they were saying in this anonymous email posting that I read, maybe just eat less meat.
That's certainly better. You know, I think the less meat you eat, the better. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have to close it up. We're just running on empty almost on our time, but thank you very much for coming and talking. And hopefully, if people are interested in vegetarianism and not really been introduced to it before, then they'll know that there are resources out there that you can find, and that you can at least learn more about your diet and the effect of diet on your health and on the environment, on the planet. And thank Mark for coming and talking to us about it.
It was fun.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm again been talking with Mark Smith, a vegetarian. He's a massage therapist in Iowa City, and just a regular guy like you and me. But he's made this choice, and he's willing to talk about it. Thanks again for joining us, and please join us again next time.